Racism in primary and secondary education in America. When did racism in schools begin? Elizabeth Eckford, on the right, travels to Little Rock Central High School in 1957 as one of 9 colored students. Her admission to the school was the result from the ruling in Brown v. the Board of Education Supreme Court case, desegregating schools nationally. The results of the ruling and integrations were both positive and negative. However, school integration was not an easy thing for students of color. Is there really racism in the schools of our society? Although the era of school integration and open hatred of colored students is long gone, racism still pervades the U.S. primary and secondary education system. Middle and high school, places of development, can be abusively racist environments young people encounter. Modern racism is not open and clear like it has been in the past. It is more difficult to see, but it is no less harmful. Types of racism in school, from peers. Many students find themselves being fiercely discriminated against by their peers. In 2013, over 1,400 children contacted support services to deal with bullying issues relating to race. This number was an increase of 69% from the previous 12 months. Bullying that centers around racism is occurring more frequently in schools rather than on social media, and bringing up the issue has often led to an increase in verbal and physical assaults. Racism from peers is a cruel cycle. It begins with incorrect ideas of race and ethnicity, and when the problem is addressed by schools, the intensity of bullying can only increase. Administrative and federal racism. More common than student-based racism is discrimination stemming from the administration of schools. This racism is more harmful as it affects large groups of middle and high schoolers rather than individuals. Racism from administrations and governments is not always intentional, but it is always harmful. The most common discriminations against colored students are school closing, teacher distributions, and discipline issues. School closings. In 2008, Washington, D.C. closed 28 public schools, claiming that the closings would save money and help failing students, while in reality, the closings ended up costing much more than they would have saved. Those students forced into new schools went to schools that were similar or worse to their old ones. Almost all of the affected students were lower-class African Americans, which exemplifies the targeting by district administrators when attempting to save costs. In Chicago 2013, 54 public schools closed. Although black students make up only 40% of the enrolled, 88% of the affected students were black. These kinds of closings in urban areas unfairly affect students of color, leading to fewer advantages in school and after education opportunities. Teacher and resource distribution. Teachers are not equally spread out within public school systems. Only 29% of high minority high schools across the country offer calculus, while those with lower minority populations offer calculus at 55% of schools. In Philadelphia public schools, teachers at high minority schools are paid almost $15,000 less than their peers. This difference in salary usually equates to a lower level of experience, meaning minorities are being taught by less experienced teachers on average. Discipline issues. Discipline in public middle and high schools across the country is easily the clearest example of racism in the system. Over 70% of students arrested or handed over to the authorities are Hispanic or African American. Only 5% of white students are annually expelled across the country compared to the suspension of 16% of black students. 16% of America's public school students are black, yet they compose 31% of students arrested at school. The numbers clearly don't add up. Despite the low population makeup of minority students, they are disproportionately expelled and reprimanded. Social ethical judgment. Discrimination. The institutional discrimination found within the public school system of America is quite obvious with all the teacher distribution issues and lack of resources for minority-dominant schools. Structural discrimination is also a factor. The closing of schools, in theory, to move students to better environments does not work, as shown by the D.C. school closings. Teachers hold back students that they think will not succeed for their own good. This harms them in the long run. For example, Alejandra, a student in Santa Barbara, California, was held back by her guidance counselor. On the peer-to-peer level, individual intentional discrimination is clear as students bully their fellow students who are minorities. This discrimination is so rampant because of misconceptions about the communities that these minorities live in. Ideas about the emphasis on school are wrong. Administrators, students, and lawmakers don't live in the communities and see how valued education really is, so they don't focus on their public education. Principle of participation. The lower level education received by minorities has lasting consequences. Both during and following their middle school and high school years, students often miss the opportunities to advance their learning. Students of color can't explore themselves in good environments the way others can, meaning they cannot participate in a society the way they have a right to. Although students aren't denied participation to school, economic, social, and other factors make it very difficult to succeed, violating the Catholic social teaching principle of participation in society. This principle states all people have the ability to participate and better themselves in society, an ability not afforded to students of color because of subtle racism and indifference to their education. Principle of preferential protection. The duty that Americans have to help minority students is being ignored for the most part. The Catholic social teaching principle of preferential protection dictates that, as privileged Americans, we must protect those who are not as fortunate as us. This includes those who cannot receive a good education. This principle is too being broken. We stand by as students who are being denied education are passed over or cast out on their own. Those with the ability to help are too focused on their own personal gain instead of focusing on the greater good. Cycle of socialization. The problems facing minorities in public schools together make up a cycle of socialization. Targets are the minorities, and agents are the Caucasian students. A cycle of bullying, discrimination, lack of proper attention and resources, and other factors leads to an unsuccessful education experience. These minorities come out of high school and continue the cycle by remaining where they are, then sending their own children to public school to have the same experience they did. The other path the cycle can take is the prison pipeline route, which hands over troubled students to the authorities to be placed in the federal system. Neither of these avenues are fair, and both continue to funnel minorities into unsuccessful lives if they aren't broken. Conclusion. What can be done? To fix the problem of racism in public education, we need to be more aware of what this racism really is. Racism is not as clear-cut or obvious as it once was. It is difficult to see, but it is just as harmful. Understanding that this racism still pervades our society is key to making a difference. 1. Stop making assumptions. Many of the harmful effects of racism in the public school system are felt because of the incorrect thoughts as to how communities feel about education and how they will react. 2. Talk to students. Ask students of color if they feel they are being discriminated against by individuals or administrations. Use moral sense to analyze situations and make judgments. 3. Research organizations. There are many organizations, such as Childline, that work with students to deal with issues of racism in the classroom. Contacting them gives you the power to make a change.